Thugs bullied a mother and her disabled son. Then 100 Hell's Angels arrived. Sarah sat at her small kitchen table, sipping on a cup of tea, the warm liquid comforting her as the soft rays of the early morning sun filtered through the window. Life wasn't easy for Sarah, but she had always managed to make it work. A mother to her 10-year-old son, Timmy, Sarah had faced more than her fair share of challenges, but none quite as heart-wrenching as raising a child with a disability. Timmy had cerebral palsy, a condition that affected his muscles and motor skills. From the moment he was born, Sarah had been his protector, his advocate, and his greatest cheerleader. Life with Timmy wasn't always easy, but Sarah had learned to navigate the world with patience, understanding, and the fierce love only a mother could provide. Timmy's disability meant he couldn't run, play sports like the other kids, or do many of the things children his age took for granted, but that didn't stop him from dreaming big. He loved animals, especially dinosaurs, and spent hours drawing them, imagining what life would be like when they roamed the earth. "Mom, can we go to the park today?" Timmy asked from the doorway, his eyes bright with excitement. Sarah smiled, setting her cup down. "Of course, sweetie. Let me just finish up here and we'll head out." Their small, cozy home was filled with the laughter and love that Sarah had worked hard to create. Despite their struggles, they had each other, and that was enough. As Sarah prepared Timmy's lunch, she thought about their day ahead. It was going to be just like any other. Quiet, peaceful, with nothing extraordinary on the horizon. The weather was perfect for a trip to the park, where Timmy could sit and draw his favorite dinosaurs in the grass. It was a calm, ordinary life, one that Sarah had come to cherish, even though she knew that danger often lurked in the most unexpected places. Their town, a quiet suburb just on the outskirts of the city, was a place where everyone knew everyone. The streets were lined with neatly kept homes, their lawns well manicured and their fences freshly painted. It was a town where people smiled and waved as they passed each other on their daily walks, and where kids played outside, riding bikes and skateboards up and down the quiet streets. But beneath the surface of this picturesque town, something darker lingered. There were whispers about a gang of local thugs that had been causing trouble in the area. No one spoke about it openly, but everyone knew. The group had been known for their violent tendencies and their intimidation tactics, and while they were careful to stay out of the spotlight, they had a reputation that instilled fear in the hearts of anyone who crossed their path. Sarah had never had a reason to worry about them. She kept to herself and tried to shield Timmy from the dangers of the world. But she had heard the stories, the rumors about the gang's activities, their involvement in petty crimes, and their propensity for bullying anyone they saw as weak or vulnerable. They preyed on the unsuspecting, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a knot of unease whenever she saw one of them loitering on the street corner or hanging out by the local store. But today, Sarah tried to push those fears aside. Today was about enjoying the day with her son, just as she had every other day. The world might be unpredictable, but for now they were safe. They had their quiet little corner of the world, and nothing was going to take that from them. It was a sunny afternoon when Sarah and Timmy set out for the park. The birds chirped in the trees, and the streets were bathed in a golden hue from the setting sun. Sarah's hand rested gently on Timmy's shoulder as they walked, the rhythm of their steps in sync with one another. Timmy chatted away about his latest dinosaur drawings, excitedly describing the creatures he had imagined. Sarah listened, her heart swelling with pride. Despite everything he faced, Timmy never lost his spark. He was curious, imaginative, and full of joy. She wished she could protect him from the harsh realities of the world, but she knew that she couldn't shield him from everything. As they passed the corner of their street, Sarah noticed a group of men standing near the entrance to the alleyway. They were rough-looking, their clothes torn and dirty, and their eyes had a sharpness that made Sarah uneasy. They were the thugs, the ones she had heard about in hushed whispers from neighbors and friends. She tried to keep walking, focusing on Timmy and their destination. But as they passed by, one of the men called out, "Well, well, what do we have here? A little freak show, huh?" The man sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Sarah froze, her heart racing. She knew she should keep walking, not engage, but something in the way he looked at Timmy made her blood boil. "Hey, lady, what's wrong with your kid? Can't even walk right. What a waste of space," the man taunted, laughing cruelly. Timmy's eyes widened in confusion, his small hand clutching his mother's as he looked up at her. Sarah's protective instincts flared, but she kept her voice calm. "Let's just go." "Timmy, don't pay any attention to them," she whispered, trying to steer him away. But the man stepped forward, blocking their path. "You think you can just walk away from me? What are you, some kind of special snowflake?" He jeered. A wave of fear washed over Sarah, but she refused to back down. She stepped in front of Timmy, shielding him with her body. "Please, just leave us alone," she said, her voice trembling. But the man didn't stop. He stepped closer, towering over Sarah, and before she could react, he shoved Timmy roughly, sending him tumbling to the ground. "No, Timmy!" Sarah screamed, rushing to her son's side. Timmy, tears welling up in his eyes, looked up at her, his face a mixture of confusion and pain. The sight broke Sarah's heart. She helped him to his feet, her body trembling with anger and fear. But she knew that if she stood up to this man, there would be consequences. Sarah's heart raced as she bent down to help Timmy to his feet, her hands shaking slightly. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be all right. But the words caught in her throat. The thug who had shoved Timmy stood before them, his eyes gleaming with malice as he crossed his arms. His smirk only deepened as Sarah's protective gaze met his. "Did you see that, lady? Your kid can't even stay on his feet," the man jeered. His voice was thick with mockery. "Is that how you're raising him? Pathetic." Timmy looked up at Sarah, his small frame trembling, but he didn't cry. He never cried, not like most kids did when they were hurt. His strength was quiet, but Sarah could see how shaken he was. Timmy's innocent face, normally filled with curiosity and wonder, now held confusion and fear. "Leave him alone," Sarah said sharply, trying to keep her voice steady, but the tremor betrayed her fear. She placed a gentle hand on Timmy's shoulder, as if to shield him from the world around him. The other man, seeing her vulnerability, took a step closer, eyes narrowing. "You think he's special?" The thug sneered. "What's wrong with him, huh? You really want to protect someone like him? He's just a burden on society." Sarah could feel the weight of his words as if they were sharp knives cutting into her skin. The bullying was no longer just about physical intimidation. It had become personal. A cruel, venomous attack on her son, on everything she had worked so hard to protect. Her instincts screamed at her to fight back, but a part of her knew she had to stay calm, or things would escalate quickly. "Let's just go, Timmy," she whispered, her voice barely audible as she tried to move him past the thug, her heart pounding in her chest, but the thug wasn't done. He stepped in front of them, blocking their way. "Not so fast, lady. Where do you think you're going?" Timmy winced at the man's harsh tone, and Sarah felt her body tense. This was no longer just an unfortunate encounter. It was turning into something far worse. And then, as if things weren't already bad enough, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. The sound of approaching footsteps was followed by the unmistakable roar of engines in the distance. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, thinking it was the sound of a passing car, but the noise grew louder, more powerful. She glanced back, her eyes widening as the unmistakable sound of motorcycles filled the air. Her first thought was a fleeting hope. Maybe it was someone who could help. But then she remembered the area and her stomach dropped. Was it the Hells Angels? Or was it just another group of rowdy bikers? The thug in front of them, noticing Sarah's distraction, saw an opportunity to press the attack. He grabbed Timmy's drawing pad from the boy's hands, tossing it carelessly aside. "What? You gonna let him draw dinosaurs all day while he can't even stand up straight?" He laughed, his voice dripping with malice. Timmy's face flushed with embarrassment, and Sarah felt the heat of anger rise in her chest. "Please." Sarah's voice was shaky, but she tried again to push past him, but the thug grabbed her arm, jerking her back. "Did you think you could just walk away from this, lady? You're not going anywhere," the thug growled. The tension in the air was thick, the kind of tension that made Sarah's heart race. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest, the heavy feeling of helplessness creeping in. She had no choice but to face these men alone without any help, it seemed. Just as Sarah felt her resolve weakening, the roar of the engines grew deafening. She turned toward the sound, her heart leaping in her chest, not knowing what to expect, and that's when she saw them. The sound of the motorcycles was thunderous, shaking the ground beneath her feet. The first thing she saw were the bikes, large, black, and imposing, their chrome parts gleaming in the sunlight. But it wasn't just one or two riders. No, the entire street seemed to come alive as over 100 motorcycles roared into the parking lot. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized who these riders were. They were unmistakable, the Hells Angels. The notorious biker gang, feared and respected by many, had arrived in full force. And they weren't here to play games. As the Hells Angels pulled into the lot, the thugs, who had been so confident just moments before, began to back off. Sarah could see the panic in their eyes. They were outnumbered, and they knew it. The bikers didn't immediately rush into action. Instead, they dismounted slowly, calmly, with an air of authority and control that sent a chill through Sarah's spine. The leader, a tall man with a grizzled beard and a weathered leather jacket, stepped forward. His eyes locked onto the thug who had been tormenting Sarah and Timmy. "Hey, you want to pick on someone? You want to bully a kid, huh?" The leader's voice was deep, commanding, and full of authority. The thug sneered. "What's it to you, old man? You gonna stop me?" The biker didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a few steps forward, his presence intimidating. "You have two choices," he said calmly. "You can walk away and we can all pretend this never happened. Or you can stay and deal with the consequences." The thug, still bristling with anger, puffed out his chest. "You think you can intimidate me with a bunch of motorcycles?" The leader smiled grimly. "It's not the motorcycles you should be worried about, buddy. It's the men who ride them. The heroes are here." Sarah watched in stunned silence as the Hells Angels surrounded the thugs, not with violence, but with presence. The leader, his name revealed later as Mike, addressed Sarah with a level of respect that left her speechless. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Mike asked, his voice low but kind. "We saw what happened. You don't need to be scared anymore." Sarah, still in shock, could only nod. Her eyes flicked between Mike and the thugs, who were now backing away, their faces pale with fear. The Hells Angels didn't lift a finger, but their mere presence had made it clear. These thugs weren't in control anymore. The thug who had shoved Timmy looked around, his bravado faltering. "This isn't over," he muttered, but he knew it was. Without another word, the group of thugs turned and fled, disappearing down the alleyway. Sarah exhaled, her body trembling with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She bent down to help Timmy up again, her heart swelling with gratitude for the bikers who had come to their rescue. She didn't know what to say, but the gratitude in her eyes spoke volumes. Mike nodded at her and gave her a reassuring smile. "You're safe now," he said simply. And with that, the Hells Angels revved their engines once again and rode off, leaving Sarah and Timmy standing in the parking lot, surrounded by the remnants of what had been a terrifying ordeal. The roar of the Hells Angels' motorcycles faded into the distance, but Sarah stood frozen for a long moment, still absorbing what had just happened. The adrenaline was wearing off and her knees were weak from the shock of it all. She looked down at Timmy, who was still standing beside her, his wide eyes filled with awe and confusion. "Mom, are we really okay?" Timmy asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah knelt down, taking his face in her hands. "Yes, sweetie. We're okay now," she whispered back, her voice shaky but filled with reassurance. "We're safe." Timmy's face lit up with a small, hesitant smile. He had witnessed something extraordinary today, something that would forever change how he viewed the world. The feeling of being protected by the unexpected presence of the Hells Angels was overwhelming. For a moment, Sarah could see a flicker of hope in her son's eyes, a brief moment when he realized that not everyone in the world was out to hurt him, that there were still people who would stand up for others. Sarah didn't know what to say. She had no idea how to explain the chain of events to Timmy, how out of nowhere a group of notorious bikers had swooped in and saved them from what seemed like an inevitable confrontation. But at that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that they were safe, and the menacing thugs were gone. "Let's go home." "Timmy, we've had enough excitement for today," Sarah said, trying to sound calm, but the exhaustion was evident in her voice. They started walking back toward their car, Timmy holding tightly to his mother's hand. Sarah kept glancing behind them, half expecting to see the thugs reappearing or to hear the sound of those motorcycles roaring back in anger. But all was quiet. The world had returned to its usual, predictable rhythm, at least for the moment. As Sarah and Timmy were getting into the car, a voice interrupted her thoughts.
"Hey, ma'am, wait up!"
Sarah turned, startled, only to see the man from earlier, the leader of the Hells Angels, Mike, approaching her. He had taken off his helmet, revealing his weathered, grizzled face, his dark hair tucked under a leather bandana. He wasn't imposing in the way the thugs had been, but there was an undeniable strength about him. The way he carried himself spoke volumes. He wasn't here for trouble. He was here to stop it. "I'm sorry you had to go through all that," Mike said, his voice steady and calm. "We saw what was happening, and we don't take kindly to bullies." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but the words were lost in her throat. She had no idea how to thank him, or how to even process everything that had just happened. Instead, she simply nodded, grateful for his presence. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." Mike shrugged, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "You don't have to thank us. It's just what we do. We've got a code. We protect the vulnerable, the ones who can't stand up for themselves." He paused, his gaze softening. "I can tell you're doing everything you can for your boy. But sometimes life throws things at you that you just can't control, and that's when people like us step in." Sarah was silent for a moment, her mind spinning as she processed his words. A sense of awe and gratitude filled her chest. Here was a man who had no obligation to help. A man who could have turned away, yet he chose to stand up for her and Timmy. In a world that often seemed indifferent, the Hells Angels had shown her a glimpse of something rare: honor, compassion, and community. We didn't expect any of this," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Most people don't, but it's our job to make sure good people don't have to face the bad ones alone." Sarah swallowed hard. There was so much more she wanted to say, so much more she needed to ask, but she was overwhelmed. She had never been one to rely on others for help, and the idea that a group of bikers, known for their rebellious ways, had come to her aid felt surreal. Mike gave a small nod, sensing her confusion. "Don't worry about it," he said. "You don't owe us anything. Just look out for yourself and your son, and if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call." Before she could respond, Mike turned and walked back to his motorcycle, mounting it with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. The other bikers were already starting their engines, revving them up one by one, the rumble of their machines filling the air. They were a force of nature, a storm of power and unity that was hard to ignore. "Take care of him, okay?" Mike called over his shoulder, his voice filled with sincerity. "I will," Sarah promised, watching as the group of bikers slowly disappeared into the distance, the sound of their engines echoing in her ears long after they were gone. As Sarah got into the car and started the engine, she couldn't help but reflect on the events of the day. The world she had lived in had just shifted in a way she could never have anticipated. The Hells Angels were not the monsters she had imagined. They weren't the villains society painted them to be. Instead, they had been the unexpected heroes, showing her that even in a world filled with danger and uncertainty, there were people who would rise up to do the right thing. Her thoughts turned inward as she looked at Timmy, who had fallen silent in the passenger seat beside her. He stared out the window, his expression distant. Sarah reached over and gently placed her hand on his. He looked up at her, meeting her gaze with a small shy smile. "Mom," Timmy said softly, "those bikers were really cool. They made the bad guys leave." Sarah chuckled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from his face. "Yeah, they did, didn't they? They were very brave." Timmy's eyes sparkled with wonder. "Do you think I could be brave like them one day?" Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You already are, Timmy. You've always been brave. And just like today, there will always be people who will stand by you when you need them most." Timmy nodded solemnly, his small hand gripping hers as they continued their drive home. It was a quiet ride, but the air between them was filled with a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. The incident at the parking lot lingered in her mind, haunting her thoughts like a ghost that wouldn't fade. She kept replaying every detail: the cruel words of the thugs, the shoving of Timmy, the overpowering sense of helplessness that had flooded her heart. It was hard for her to shake the feeling of fear that had settled in her chest, but something else had changed as well. The arrival of the Hells Angels had left her with a strange sense of comfort. Their intervention had been swift, and although she had expected a violent confrontation, it hadn't been like that at all. The Hells Angels hadn't used force. They'd used their presence, their power, and their unwavering sense of justice to protect her and her son. They'd given her something she hadn't had in a long time: hope. Sarah had always prided herself on her independence. She had raised Timmy on her own, without anyone to help, and she had always believed that she could handle anything that came her way. But that day she realized that sometimes it was okay to accept help when it was offered. Sometimes the strength to protect others came not from being alone, but from standing together. That evening, as Sarah sat with Timmy at the dinner table, she noticed how different he seemed. The usual shyness he carried had softened, replaced by a quiet confidence. He wasn't the same Timmy she had known before the incident. She could see it in his eyes, the realization that the world wasn't all bad. People could be cruel, yes, but people could also be kind. "Mom, do you think we'll see those bikers again?" Timmy asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Sarah paused for a moment, her fork halfway to her mouth. "I don't know, sweetie, but if we do, we'll thank them properly, won't we?" Timmy nodded eagerly. "They were like heroes. Do you think I could be a hero too?" Sarah smiled warmly, setting her fork down and looking at him with affection. "You already are, Timmy. Every day you show me just how strong you are. You don't need a bike or a jacket to be a hero. You're a hero in your own way, and that's what matters." Timmy's eyes brightened as he absorbed her words, and Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. In that moment, she realized that the strength she had always sought for herself and Timmy wasn't something external. It was something that had always been within them, waiting to be uncovered. The following week, Sarah found herself thinking about Mike, the leader of the Hells Angels, and the rest of the bikers. They had left a lasting impression on her, not just because they had protected her and Timmy, but because of the sense of community and brotherhood they displayed. There was something magnetic about them, something that made Sarah feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, as Sarah was leaving the local grocery store, she saw Mike again. He was parked near the entrance, leaning against his motorcycle, looking every bit the tough biker that he was. But there was something different about him now. He wasn't just some intimidating figure. He was a man who had a code, a sense of duty to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then walked over to him. "Mike," she called, her voice tentative but filled with gratitude. "I wanted to thank you. Again." Mike turned and smiled when he saw her. "No need to thank us, Sarah. Like I said, it's just what we do." She nodded, but there was something more she wanted to know. "I've been thinking, why do you do it? Why help people like us?" Mike looked at her for a long moment, his eyes serious but kind. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, he chose them carefully. "Not everyone gets a fair shake in life," Mike said, his voice low and steady. "Some people are born with it easier than others, but most of us, well, we've had to fight for what we have. And we know what it feels like to be pushed around. We don't stand by and watch that happen. Not on our watch." Sarah felt a wave of understanding wash over her. "So it's about, what, loyalty?" "Yeah," Mike said with a slight grin. "Loyalty, respect, and looking out for one another. That's the code we live by. We don't do it for glory. We do it because it's right." Sarah didn't know why, but hearing those words brought tears to her eyes. She had always tried to be strong, to keep going no matter how tough things got. But in that moment, she realized that it wasn't enough to just be strong on your own. You needed others to help carry the load sometimes. Mike gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Take care of yourself, Sarah, and take care of Timmy." With that, he mounted his bike and revved the engine. As he rode off, Sarah stood there feeling a newfound sense of peace. She didn't know where life would take her next, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Days passed, but the aftermath of the incident stayed with Sarah in ways she couldn't fully explain. She had never considered herself someone who needed saving, but the intervention of the Hells Angels had shown her a side of humanity she had never really experienced before. As a mother, Sarah's protective instincts were always on high alert. She had spent years shielding Timmy from the harsh realities of the world, trying to give him a safe space where he could grow and thrive. But that encounter had forced her to face the truth. Sometimes it wasn't enough to just shield someone from harm. Sometimes you needed to stand up and fight for what was right, even if it meant relying on others. The sense of vulnerability that had overwhelmed her in that moment when the thugs cornered them began to subside. And in its place was something stronger, resilience. She didn't need to face the world alone anymore. There were people out there who believed in justice, who would stand up for what was right. People like Mike and the Hells Angels. And while Sarah would never fully understand the world they came from, she now knew that they weren't the bad guys. They were just people who had chosen to use their strength to protect the weak, to stand against bullies when no one else would. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself a little less afraid. Timmy, too, seemed to have regained his confidence. He spent less time worrying about the bullies at school, less time hiding his disability and more time drawing his favorite dinosaurs. Sarah couldn't help but smile when she saw his drawings, each one more detailed, more imaginative than the last. One evening, as Sarah and Timmy sat together in their living room, Timmy turned to her with a question. "Mom," he said, "do you think we could help other people too? Like the Hells Angels helped us?" Sarah paused for a moment, considering the question. "You know, Timmy," she said softly, "I think we could. Maybe not in the same way, but there are other ways to help people. You don't have to be a hero with a motorcycle to make a difference." Timmy nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to help people. I want to make the world better." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Then we'll find a way. We'll make sure the world is a better place for people like you, people like us." And in that moment, Sarah knew that despite all the challenges they had faced, they had made it through stronger than ever. They weren't just survivors, they were part of something bigger. They were part of a community, one where kindness, courage, and loyalty still meant something. The days that followed the Hells Angels' intervention brought change to Sarah in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had always been a determined, independent woman, but now there was an added layer of resolve in her. The emotional toll from the incident began to fade, replaced by a sense of empowerment. No longer was she just the mother of a disabled child trying to make ends meet. She had become someone who was ready to face the world head-on, knowing that there were people out there who had her back, like Mike and the Hells Angels. The incident had shown Sarah that help could come from the most unexpected places, and it had sparked something within her. She realized that while she'd always been strong for Timmy, she had to be strong for herself too. In the following weeks, Sarah found herself getting more involved in her community. She began volunteering at a local center for children with disabilities, where Timmy could spend time with other kids who faced similar challenges. It was here that Sarah truly began to heal, not just emotionally but also socially. She realized there was so much more to life than just surviving day to day. There was purpose, there was connection, and there was hope. Sarah began working with the center to create programs that not only helped children with disabilities, but also educated the community about bullying and the importance of inclusion. The scars from the bullying incident remained, but they had become part of Sarah's story, one that she was now determined to share with others to make sure it didn't happen again. While Sarah and Timmy were rebuilding their lives, the impact of the Hells Angels in their small town wasn't over. Word spread fast about what had happened in the parking lot. Initially, there had been whispers of skepticism. After all, the Hells Angels were known for their rebellious reputation, and no one had expected them to act as protectors. But as time passed, more and more people came forward with stories of their own experiences with the group. Stories that painted a different picture than the one painted by the media. It wasn't long before the Hells Angels' presence in the community grew more and more positive. The bikers weren't just lurking in the background waiting for trouble to strike. They were actively helping. They organized cleanup events, assisted with home repairs for elderly residents, and even helped raise funds for local schools. The media had painted them as criminals, but those who had encountered them knew the truth. They were men who valued loyalty, honor, and the protection of the vulnerable. For Sarah, this realization was both humbling and inspiring. She had spent so many years seeing only the negative aspects of people's lives, the flaws and the failures, that she had forgotten the power of redemption. Mike and the Hells Angels were proving that people could change, that even the toughest and most misunderstood individuals could make a positive impact. It was during one of these community events that Sarah found herself face-to-face with Mike again. He was helping organize a charity event for the local orphanage, and Sarah had volunteered to help with some of the logistics. She approached him as he was setting up tables, looking every bit the biker with his leather jacket, tattoos, and stern expression. "Mike," Sarah called out, her voice filled with gratitude. "I just wanted to thank you again, not just for what you did for Timmy and me, but for everything you're doing for the community." Mike paused, wiping the sweat from his brow, and gave her a rare, warm smile. You don't need to thank me, Sarah. You've done a lot for this place yourself. We're just helping where we can. Sarah shook her head. No, really. I've been thinking a lot about what you said that day, about standing up for what's right and protecting those who need it. You've inspired me to do more. You've shown me what it means to be a part of something bigger than just yourself. Mike's expression softened. It's not about being part of something bigger. It's about knowing that when you stand up for others, you stand up for yourself too. When you help someone, you help yourself feel stronger. With the Hells Angels' support, Sarah began to find new purpose in her life. She continued her advocacy work for children with disabilities, but now she also started working alongside the Hells Angels to help the vulnerable in her community. They became an unlikely but powerful team, Sarah, the determined mother, and Mike, the hardened biker leader. Together, they made a difference in ways that neither had expected. In the local park where Timmy once dreamed up his dinosaur creations, the community now gathered regularly for various events and initiatives, all fueled by Sarah's passion for change and the support of the Hells Angels. The once quiet, hesitant woman who had been pushed to the edge by bullies now stood as a pillar of strength, surrounded by those who had her back, people who understood that helping each other wasn't about what you had, but what you were willing to give. The ripple effect of the Hells Angels' intervention continued to spread throughout the town. People who had once feared the gang began to see them in a new light. Local businesses that had once shied away from their presence started offering discounts for the bikers' community work, while residents who had once whispered in the corners of coffee shops about the gang's misdeeds now offered them a nod of respect. Sarah's own transformation was a reflection of the town's. Where once there had been fear and division, now there was unity and support. The bullies who had once roamed freely through the streets were nowhere to be seen. People stood up for one another now, knowing that someone would always be there to back them up, just as the Hells Angels had backed her up when it mattered most. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah felt her confidence growing. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. She found herself working on new initiatives, organizing events to raise awareness about the importance of kindness and respect in a world that often seemed devoid of both. And Timmy, her brave boy, was no longer the quiet, self-conscious child he had been. His drawings became more colorful and imaginative, and he began sharing them with others, showing off his growing confidence. The boy who had once been ashamed of his disability now wore it as a badge of pride. Timmy had his mother to thank for much of his strength, but he also had the Hells Angels to thank. They had shown him that even the most unexpected people could be heroes, and that everyone had the power to make a difference, no matter their past. One sunny afternoon, as Sarah and Timmy sat in the park, Timmy turned to her with a serious look on his face. "Mom," he said softly, "I want to do something big, like the Hells Angels did." Sarah raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "I want to help people like they helped us. I don't know how, but I want to make a difference too. Maybe I could become an artist, and then I could sell my drawings to help kids like me. What do you think?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked at her son. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Timmy, and I know that no matter what, you'll always be a hero to me." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their journey settling in. Both mother and son had been through so much, but they had come out stronger on the other side. And as they looked ahead to the future, they knew one thing for sure. No matter the challenges they faced, they would always have each other, and now they would always have a community that would stand by them. It had been months since the incident with the Hells Angels, and life had started to feel normal again. Sarah and Timmy were living their lives with a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. The town, once wary of outsiders, was now united, stronger than ever. Sarah's advocacy work had flourished, and the Hells Angels were a regular, if unexpected, presence at community events. Things were peaceful, but as the saying goes, calm before the storm. One evening, as Sarah sat at her kitchen table preparing dinner, she heard a knock on the door. It was odd, given that most people in the neighborhood would have just rung the bell. When she opened the door, she was met with the sight of a few familiar faces, the thugs from the parking lot. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't seen them since the day the Hells Angels had come to their rescue. But now they were back and their demeanor was different, angrier, more desperate. They had clearly learned nothing from the encounter, and Sarah could see in their eyes that they had come to finish what they had started. "Got a problem with us, lady?" One of them sneered, his eyes glinting with malice. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice steady, even as her heart pounded in her chest. She had hoped this chapter of her life was behind her, but she knew it was never truly over. Bullies didn't just disappear, they festered until they were ready to strike again. "We're not done with you yet," another thug spat, stepping closer. "You think you're safe now, don't you? You and your freak of a son." Before he could finish his sentence, Sarah's phone buzzed on the counter. She quickly glanced at it and saw a message from Mike. "We know they're back. Stay calm, we're on our way." Her heart leaped in relief. Sarah knew the Hells Angels would never let this stand. But still, she couldn't just wait for them to show up. She had to protect Timmy. Her mind raced with all the ways this could escalate, and as the thugs grew bolder, she realized she wasn't the scared woman she used to be. She wasn't going to let them intimidate her, not anymore. As Sarah stepped forward, ready to confront the thugs, a loud roar of engines interrupted the tense silence. The unmistakable sound of motorcycles reached her ears, and her heart surged with hope. It wasn't just one or two bikers this time. This was different. This was the full force of the Hells Angels. Sarah could see the familiar silhouettes of Mike and his gang pulling up in front of her house, their motorcycles kicking up dust as they rolled in like an unstoppable force of nature. The thugs hesitated, fear flickering across their faces. They had once thought they could intimidate Sarah, that they could push her around. But now, with the Hells Angels in front of them, their bravado was crumbling. The leader of the gang, the same man who had shoved Timmy that day, sneered. "You think a bunch of bikers can protect you?" he challenged, his voice dripping with disdain. Mike, dressed in his leather jacket, walked forward, his expression calm but intense. "It's not about thinking, it's about knowing. You don't pick on people who can't fight back. You don't mess with people like her," he said, his eyes locking onto Sarah's attackers. "And you sure as hell don't do it on our turf." The tension was palpable as the two sides faced off. Sarah could see that the thugs were outnumbered, and their confidence was beginning to wane. They had underestimated the bikers before, but they had learned nothing from the first encounter. This wasn't just about confrontation anymore, it was about justice. "Get out of here," Mike said, his voice low and threatening. "You don't belong here, and you don't have the right to hurt anyone anymore." For a moment, the thugs stood their ground, the silence between them thick with the threat of violence. But one by one, they started to back away. The leader of the group, realizing they were outmatched, sneered one last time before turning to leave. "This isn't over," he muttered, but he knew they had lost. The Hells Angels had made it clear that there would be no more bullying, no more intimidation. Not in this town. As they retreated down the street, Sarah let out a long, shaky breath. She had feared this moment, feared that the bullies would return, that they would break her spirit. But now, standing tall with Mike and the Hells Angels at her side, she felt stronger than ever. With the thugs gone, Sarah turned to Mike, who had been quietly observing the whole ordeal. The sight of the bikers, their stern faces softened with the light of the setting sun, filled her with gratitude. They had done it again, they had protected her, and they had done so with honor, without violence, without bloodshed. Mike gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm fine. I don't know how to thank you." "Genosa, you don't have to thank us. We're just doing our job, keeping people safe. You and your son are part of this community, and we don't let people like them tear it down." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly protected, not just by the Hells Angels, but by the very community she had worked so hard to build. The bond she shared with Mike and the others wasn't one of mere gratitude. It was one of respect, and that respect had been earned not through fear, but through action. As the Hells Angels revved their engines and began to leave, Sarah turned to Timmy, who had been standing silently by her side throughout the whole ordeal. He looked up at her with wide eyes, a mixture of awe and admiration in his gaze. "Mom, that was amazing," he whispered. Sarah smiled and knelt down to hug him. "You're amazing too, Timmy. You've always been my hero." In the days that followed, Sarah continued her advocacy work with more vigor than ever. The town had changed in ways she hadn't expected. The Hells Angels, once feared and misunderstood, were now seen as protectors, heroes in their own right. Sarah was no longer afraid to stand up for herself, and Timmy was no longer afraid to dream big. Together, they had shown the world that no one, no matter their circumstances, should ever be made to feel small or powerless. The town, once divided and full of fear, had become a place where kindness and justice prevailed. Sarah had become a pillar of strength for those who needed it most, and she knew that no matter what happened, she would always have her community and the Hells Angels by her side. And in the end, that was enough. As Sarah sat on the porch with Timmy that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The challenges they had faced had shaped them, yes, but they had also forged something stronger, a sense of unity and resilience that couldn't be broken. "Mom," Timmy asked quietly, "do you think we can help more people like we helped today?" Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I know we can, Timmy. We'll always find a way to make the world a better place." And with that, they watched the sunset together, knowing that no matter what the future held, they were ready for it.